listening to episode 29, chapter 4 of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. I'm Chris Lamberth.
And I'm Josh Havens. And we're on a journey to learn what it means to live a lifestyle of discipleship. We're glad you're joining us and hope that as you set aside this time for God, that He will help you grow today in the everyday moments of life.
Today, we're continuing our conversation with Tricia Rhodes about her book, Sacred Chaos: Spiritual Disciplines for the Life You Have. Tricia specializes in helping others experience God's presence through practicing soul care. An adjunct professor for Fuller Theological Seminary and author of 7 books, including the acclaimed The Soul at Rest, she is a practiced minister with over 40 years of experience. With a rich background in Christian spirituality and a PhD in leadership studies, Tricia draws from a broad spectrum to create life-giving tools that can make anyone's spiritual journey relevant and meaningful.
Have you ever tried to practice a new spiritual discipline like journaling or fasting and thought you had to understand how to do it perfectly? Maybe you had to have the right journal and write about the right events in life and reflect on them perfectly. Or maybe you found yourself in an argument over what you should fast and whether or not it's proper to drink juices during a fast. At times, it's good to be precise with what we do. At other times, though, it's better to experiment a bit. We were all created with our own personalities, and the way each of us grow is often just a little different. Experimenting with spiritual disciplines isn't about finding your own personal path to growth, though. We all need to pray and communicate with God. But the way we communicate with God may come in different forms and in different places. In this chapter, Tricia talks about the value she's found in experimenting with the spiritual disciplines and how it helped her find growth in the chaos of life.
One of the other things I love about your book is there's a great emphasis on experimenting with the spiritual disciplines in it. Number one, you take, I think, a very unique approach to all of the spiritual disciplines and just the way that you talk about and present them in each chapter. But you're also very intentional about giving us calls to action at the end of each chapter, and you have explicit sections called experiments in prayer or experiments in whatever it is. So, number one, where did this idea of experimenting with the spiritual disciplines come from for you? Was this something that you came upon because you needed it yourself? Or because you also talk about dark night of the soul in the book, and so I kind of want to move into that territory if you're comfortable talking about that. But But yeah, I'm curious as to how you came up with experimenting, because it would never occur to me to experiment, because again, it's the bubble. This is the way I pray, 30 minutes, read the Bible and a psalm. Anyway.
Yeah. I think again, it was that season of my life where I had to experiment with prayer because I couldn't do what I'd always done. And that's why it became so rich for me, even though it never stopped being chaotic. I like the word experiment because I think the idea that there's some right way to do this is just so messed up, because that's not biblical. It may be one of the shadow sides of evangelicalism, is that there's the right way to do these things and that aren't even in the Bible. So,
yes.
And we can get pretty locked in, if we don't start, we go through the ACTS, you make sure you're, I don't remember them all. I used to do them all those. And I don't have any problem with any of those, but I just think there's times we just need to say, I can just try things and see what works, because we have different personalities. I love to journal, and I saw you wrote a book on journaling, and I think that's so exciting. And I love to journal, but I'm a writer. My husband, it's painful. It's painful for him. He'd probably do well with your book, because just to write, I've tried to get him to journal for our entire marriage. I finally gave up on, it's not his personality. So why should I say this is what everybody should do just because it happens to be something that's, wonderful for me? So that's why I say experiment. And I think if you think of it as an experiment instead of thinking of it as a discipline or something we're supposed to do, you'll actually have more fun with it, and you'll want to do it more.
Yeah, that's a great point. 2 things. all those things we hold as like dogmatic ways of practicing the disciplines were experiments at one point. Like somebody
That's
tried
true.
them.
That's so true. That is so
Except
true.
for the Lord's Prayer. That's dogma.
That's dogma.
Yeah. But how often
That's
and
true,
how you
yes.
say it and which one.
Yeah.
That's true. Exactly. So even in that, there's some ways to practice. And is it format or verbatim or anyway.
Yeah.
The other thing is I love that idea of experimenting because you're right. It does take the pressure off, at least for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Discipline, even though and I will teach on this and preach on it, that discipline has a bad rap and we shouldn't think of it as a bad word. Even in my mind, it holds a little bit of a
Yeah.
painful place because it represents pain in some way, right?
Right.
And that is a good thing. There is a place for that. But
That's where some of the growth happens.
That's
is
right.
In those moments where you're stretched just a little bit farther than you've ever been stretched before.
exactly. But experiments say it doesn't have to work out. I don't have to be, quote, successful with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I me personally, I'm experimenting with a different morning routine right now. So I had a morning routine that I absolutely loved, and it really emphasized a lot of prayer. And I noticed some of my other time was being missed out because I was spending a little bit too much time in like prayer and meditation and stuff like that. And I wanted to emphasize a little bit more journaling and writing and scripture reading because honestly, some of my study had fallen to the wayside. So
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
adjust things. And it almost feels sacrilegious to play around with your schedule like that to say, wait a second, am I really going to pray less? Like maybe I should wake up earlier and then, we could talk about the whole spiritual discipline of sleep because I believe Jesus wants us to sleep. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, going back to our episode with Evan Howard,
yeah,
his idea of really just setting up these rules so that you can follow for a little bit, examine how they're going after that,
yes,
and then if something needs changing, change it.
then change it.
But it's not like you have to settle into this rut that you're going to be in for the rest of your life. It's
Right.
experiment
Yes.
for a little bit, examine, and change what you need to or adjust where you need to.
And that's so freeing because I've been very unsuccessful with this new routine. I mean, it's difficult. It's not a habit. And some days are really great. And when they're great, it feels great. But when you fail, then you sort of feel a little discouraged. And, you have to try to figure out how to walk in grace like we talked about. And that's its
Yeah.
own challenge. But
Sure.
the other thing, though, that it strikes me with experimenting was experimenting a key component for you walking through some periods of your life where we often characterize them as the dark night of the soul. You talk about it in the book that you have gone through this. I don't know any, I say good Christian, any mature Christian having followed Jesus for any length of time that hasn't gone through some sort of crisis of faith or deep struggle and valley. And so if you're comfortable, can we talk about what the role of spiritual disciplines played in that period, if you don't want to get into details, and then how the Lord used those to help you lead you out of them?
Yeah, I've had, a few dark nights, but the one that I would say is classic dark night in that it matched what saints of old wrote, where God just basically seemed to have disappeared for 2 years. And I was pretty mature in my journey, so I don't think he does that long for people earlier on. I don't think I would have survived. But I would say that the disciplines that I had in place, I was able to keep creating space, and all by grace. I don't think it was because I was disciplined. I think God used those habits to enable me to create that space so that when he did show up, I was there. And he would have got me there anyway. But I look back on those times, and I have to say, even in those empty, dark moments, because I was making space, somehow he was there in his absence, even more than sometimes he's been in his presence. I know that sounds really mystical, but that became my experience in the dark night.
Yeah. No, and we've talked to several guests about dark nights of the souls that they've gone through, and they say very similar things, right? Like, and you can't understand it unless
Right.
you have gone through something like that.
Yeah.
And that, yes, you're right. Somehow in his absence, he was more present there.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and you come away with a brand new take on the relationship and much closer because of it.
You do. You come through with a deeper faith, because I know for me, I came to the place where I was like, if I was going to walk away, this would be the time. Because, I mean, it's been a long time, God, and you are not showing up. And I couldn't walk away.
Yeah.
So to me, it was that simple. Okay, if I can't walk away, it's kind of like, where else would I go? You have the words of life. That's kind of became my mantra during that time. But if I could have walked away, I would have. But I couldn't. And that planted in me so deeply that it's always been all God. It's never been because I got it right, or I did the right discipline, or I was diligent enough. It's always been him and always will be.
That's why I really like Lewis's analogy of troughs and peaks in the Screw Tape Letters, where he describes the Wormwood, the lower demon tempter, is describing the joy that he has because his patient is going through this trough period where he's really dry and things aren't going so well, and Screwtape warns him, no, that's a bad thing.
Yeah. It's not
because
good. Yeah.
at times God withdraws his hand, and he says there toward the end of the letter, if only the will to walk is really there, he's pleased even in their stumbles. And so it's those trough periods where, like you're describing, where else are we going to go? And God's pleased in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can really only come from a place of having known who God is before that. And so I really want to encourage people who are listening, if you're going through something like this, or if you encounter it, understanding who God is. I have a thing where I now say, theology saved my life, because I lost my mother 3 years ago to suicide, and so had to go through a dark, deal with it. And so again, but latching on to who God is, who he really is, and those experiences with him, you can't just simply walk away and say, there's no such thing as God. Like, he doesn't exist, he doesn't love me, because I've had those experiences. And so in those moments of darkness and loneliness, you have to sort of say, I think you're right with the spiritual disciplines. Continue to go and to meet him, to make that space. And even though it might not feel like it, he's there. He's meeting you, and you are growing through it, even though it's discipline. It's painful.
Mm-hmm.
And so, anyway, I think experimenting with the spiritual disciplines can help. It's at least helped me to say, again, if for no other reason, that freedom to say, I don't have to follow God in this cookie cutter way, that he's created me uniquely, and I can meet with him in whatever the day demands and whatever way he demands of me. So,
I'll just add, one of the things I've been doing now for the last year or so is I do a lot of doodling, and it's interesting because I have my PhD. I love to study. Learning's my top strength. But there is something about letting I would never let anyone else see it, but it's just me and God. And there's something about that just sets me free. I just doodle scriptures and I doodle intercessions, and it's just a new, and I would never have done that before because I thought there was a right way, but that was just experimenting and having some fun with God. And I actually discovered that in the process, I was really connecting at a deeper level with them because it just settled me in. So,
yeah, that is an interesting discipline that I've seen pop up in recent years, is the Bible journaling art stuff, and it's been it is fascinating, and so it's good to hear that that's been helping you. So I haven't heard anybody like that I would consider authoritative talk about it, but I'm in a Facebook group where they do it, and so I enjoy looking at it. But
Well, here's the thing. I'm not an artist, and I get bogged down when I love all that, but I can't draw. I can't even draw stick figures. So that's kind of what's freeing to me about it, is it's something I really can't do. I can't excel at. So there's no performance in it. I'm just doing it because it gets me really still. It lets me meditate on what I'm writing in a way that is just somewhat freeing. So that's the whole idea about experimenting, is I have no idea what might work for you. I know people who walking is their best way to connect deeply with Jesus. And that would never work for me. I can enjoy it once in a while, but that's not going to be my practice. So,
developing habits of practicing spiritual disciplines can be very helpful to our spiritual lives. Those habits help us stay consistent and keep us walking with Christ each day. But as helpful as they are, our habits and routines can become ruts. When we get stuck in a spiritual rut, we need to know that we have permission to experiment with the spiritual disciplines. You can change how or when you pray, or perhaps you've had a major change in your life that disrupts your normal routine. Don't feel like you have failed as a Christian. Instead, find creative ways to make space for God throughout the day. But here's one experiment I think everyone should try at least some point in their lives. Try journaling your prayers, but don't feel pressured to fill up an entire page. Simply write out a prayer to God expressing what you hope to get out of the day.
How can you create a lifestyle of discipleship? Most Christians think discipleship is a program or a few practices thrown in at the beginning or end of the day. But we want to help you create a lifestyle where walking with Jesus throughout the day is not only possible, but natural. And we have a tool that's going to help you do just that. It's called the Daily Growth Journal. It's a guided journal that's going to help you become secure in your identity with God and authentically walk with Him in your daily life. Growing daily in your walk with Christ is possible if you cultivate a lifestyle of discipleship. And the Daily Growth Journal will help you do just that. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. To find out more about Tricia and her work, check out soulatrest.com. Then check out the next chapter in our conversation, where Tricia tells her story of coming to recognize God's grace in her life. If you want to stay up to date on everything happening at Daily Growth Discipleship, go to dailygrowthdiscipleship.com and subscribe for free. You can also subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify.